The ballroom at the top of the Chinhack Tower had a view that made grown executives go quiet, all of Seoul glittering below like something spilled and still burning. Ngozi Ademi wasn't looking at the view. She was looking at the man walking toward her, because everyone else in the room had gone carefully still, and stillness, she'd learned in exactly 9 days in this country, meant something was about to happen. He stopped in front of her, dark suit, no tie, the kind of face that had never once had to try, Kang Tae-min. She knew the name the way you know the name of a storm that hasn't reached your coastline yet, from other people's weather reports, never your own experience of it. "You're the new fellow from Houston," he said, not a question. "I am. I'll have my driver take you home tonight and to campus tomorrow. It's safer than the shuttle." He said it the way people say things they've never once had refused. Ngozi looked at him for a second longer than was comfortable for the 20 people pretending not to watch. "I've got a perfectly good bus pass," she said, "but thank you." Silence. "The kind that has a temperature." "No thank you," she added, in case the first part hadn't landed, and turned back to her drink. If you love slow burn enemies to lovers, family empires, and the kind of love story where the girl never once bends just because the room expects her to, you are exactly where you need to be. Hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell right now, because we tell stories exactly like this one every single week, and you do not want to miss what Tae-min does next. Now let's go back 9 days, to the girl who got off a plane in Seoul and had no idea she was about to become the only person in the city who ever told Kang Tae-min no. Ngozi Ademi had grown up in a house in southwest Houston where her mother kept the porch light on until every child under that roof was accounted for, and where the rule, worn smooth from repetition, was simple: you work twice as hard and you complain about it never. She carried that rule through undergrad, through 2 internships that nearly broke her, and onto the flight that brought her to Seoul with 1 suitcase and the single most important document of her adult life, her acceptance letter into the Hanel Global Fellowship, a joint MBA exchange program taking 6 students a year from outside Korea into the kind of education that opened doors nobody in her family had ever stood in front of. She'd read that letter so many times the fold lines had gone soft: full funding, housing stipend, a guaranteed placement interview on graduation. Her mother had cried at the airport, which her mother never did, and held Ngozi's face in both hands the way she did when she wanted a moment to last longer than a moment usually lasts. "You call me when you land, not tomorrow, when you land." "I will, Mama. I know you will make us proud. I am only asking you to also come home safe." Ngozi had walked through the gate without turning around, because if she turned around she would see her mother's face. And if she saw her mother's face, she wouldn't get on the plane at all. Seoul from the air looked like a circuit board someone had set on fire out of love. She pressed her forehead to the window and thought, okay, just okay, nothing bigger than that. She'd learned that big feelings needed to be brought down to a size she could carry through customs. Hanel University's gates were stone and glass and deliberately imposing. Ngozi walked through them with 1 bag on her back and the specific expression of a woman who decided in advance not to be impressed by anything a building could do to her. The courtyard was full and the whispering started almost immediately, the way weather starts, not all at once but spreading. Is she new? I've never seen her before. She's got to be one of the fellowship students. There's only 6 of them. Where's she from though? Is she even going to understand anything we say? She might. Don't be rude. Ngozi heard every syllable. Her hearing was excellent, and the whispers were nowhere near as quiet as the people making them believed. Her face gave away nothing. Straight spine, steady pace, eyes on the administration building. She had promised herself somewhere over the Pacific that whatever this place threw at her in the first 5 minutes, she would not flinch. And she was the kind of person who kept promises she made to herself, even when nobody else was around to check. She collected her building fob, found her dorm small, clean, 1 window facing a courtyard of maple trees just starting to turn, and unpacked in the fast, practiced way of someone who'd made unfamiliar rooms hers before, back in Houston when her family moved twice in 4 years chasing better school districts, better rent, better everything. Then she sat on the edge of the bed for exactly 1 minute and let herself feel how far from home she was. Then she stood up and went looking for the one place she trusted to make any city feel survivable, the library, the Hanul Library was the first place in Korea that made her exhale. Tall windows, high ceilings, the specific hush of a room holding a great many opinions that had all agreed, for now, to be quiet. She found a corner table on the 4th floor and had been working maybe 20 minutes when someone dropped into the chair across from her without asking. She looked up. A guy with an open, easy face and the posture of someone who'd never once doubted he'd be welcome wherever he sat. "You looked like you were about to lose a fight with that spreadsheet," he said in English. "I'm Chitty, 2nd year. Lagos by way of London, by way of a very confusing gap year." He set a paper cup of coffee on her side of the table. "Machine on the 2nd floor works. This one gives you hot brown disappointment." "Learn that now, Ngozi," she said. "Houston, the new fellowship cohort. There's talk about you already. There's talk about me, and I got here 9 hours ago. Welcome to Hanul," he grinned. "The staring doesn't stop. It just stops mattering, eventually." They talked for an hour, not formal small talk, but the other kind, between two people from families who'd crossed oceans and knew exactly what that cost. He told her which cafeteria line moved fastest, which professors graded exchange students harder and pretended they didn't. Then he lowered his voice. "One thing. You'll hear his name inside the week, so I'd rather you hear it from me first." "Whose name?" "Kang Tae-min." He said it like people say the names of typhoons. "His family isn't connected to this school the way donors are connected, deeper than that. His father's name opens certain doors in the city and closes others without ever raising its voice. What's he like?" "Tall. Looks like nobody's ever made him laugh by accident in his life." Chitty tilted his head. "You'll know him when you see him. Just don't be the reason a room goes quiet around him." Ngozi filed it away and thought no more about it for exactly 9 days, until a rooftop reception and a driver she didn't need. After the reception, the story traveled through Hanul faster than any lecture ever had, gathering shape, half true and half invented. She told him no. In front of everyone, she said she had a bus pass. "Do you think she knows who he is?" "I think that's exactly the point." Ngozi heard fragments of it crossing the courtyard the next day and kept walking. She decided the night before, lying awake with the maple trees black against her window, that she would not spend 18 months here performing anxiety about a man's family name. She had a fellowship to protect and a mother checking flight prices back home, and neither of those things had anything to do with Kang Tae-min, except now he kept turning up. He was in the East Reading Room on Tuesdays, which was when she always worked in the East Reading Room. He was at the campus cafe on Thursdays, 2 tables over. He crossed the courtyard on Friday exactly as she crossed it going the other way, their paths not quite meeting. And she registered, because registering things was simply what she did, precisely how close they came to meeting anyway. She did not mention it to Chitty. Chitty, however, had survived 2 years at Hanul by paying very close attention to things nobody asked him to notice, and one lunch he slid his tray across from hers with studied casualness. "How's the library?" "Fine. Nothing interesting happening in there." "Nothing interesting, Chitty. I'm being supportive. You're being nosy, where I'm from." Those are the same activity. He ate his rice, unbothered, and let it go. Their first real conversation happened on a Wednesday, over a market entry case study that Ngozi had been quietly losing an argument with for 40 minutes. Muttering under her breath in a mix of English and the Igbo her grandmother used to argue with radio hosts, not realizing how loud she'd gotten until a voice 2 tables over said, "Without any particular investment in the outcome, you're reading the second variable wrong." She looked up. Tae-min hadn't lifted his eyes from his own book. "Excuse me, the interaction term, you're treating it like it moves independently. It doesn't. Everything downstream depends on it. That's why your model keeps collapsing." She looked back at her page, read it again with that correction sitting in her mind. The entire case reorganized itself in front of her like furniture sliding into place. "Thank you," she said, and meant it, and hated slightly how much she meant it. He said nothing, turned a page. "Do you study finance?" she asked. "No." "Then how do you know that?" "I read." A pause, a lot. They fell quiet. And then she made an observation out loud, mostly to herself, the way she did when working alone, and he answered it, and she answered that. And somehow 40 minutes had disappeared, and they were arguing in low voices about whether the case study was describing a market or manufacturing one. At some point she realized he'd moved. He was sitting directly across from her now, and neither of them had said a word about when that happened. He hadn't planned to move. He'd planned to say the correction, then go back to his own work. The plan hadn't accounted for her firing back a rebuttal that was half right and entirely worth the trouble of continuing. He answered before deciding to. Now here he was, arguing about a spreadsheet with a woman who wasn't performing, being unimpressed by him. She simply wasn't, full stop, and never had been. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened to him. He was fairly sure it hadn't. Minsira arrived at the library on a Friday the way she arrived everywhere, unhurried, immaculate, a woman who never had to announce herself because rooms always did that for her. Her eyes found T-Min first, then moved precisely to the woman across from him, the shared table, the books between them. The unforced comfort of two people who'd stopped being formal without noticing. Her expression didn't change. She greeted T-Min warmly, mentioned a family dinner, something light layered carefully over something that wasn't. She didn't acknowledge Ngozi at all. At the door she paused and looked back, and her eyes found Ngozi's directly. Ngozi looked back. She didn't look away first. Sira left. T-Min was already reading again, or pretending to, but the temperature of the room had shifted, and both of them knew it. That evening when Ngozi told Chitty, he set his chopsticks down with the face of a man receiving news he'd feared and expected in equal measure. "That's Minsira," he said. "Her family and his have been circling an arrangement since before either of them could vote. You need to be very careful, Ngozi." "I'm not doing anything, Chitty. I'm sitting in a library. You are not afraid of the correct things," he said. "It's your best quality, and it is the reason I will be gray by 23. Quick pause, because I want to know what you're thinking so far. Do you think Sira is going to come for Ngozi's fellowship before the semester's out, or is there someone else pulling strings behind her? Drop your prediction in the comments below, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We genuinely love reading through them. If this story has its hooks in you already, tap that like button. It tells us to keep making more of these. Now back to Seoul. The first sign of trouble arrived quietly, the way trouble prefers to, a whisper campaign that never once said anything to Ngozi's face, always just behind her. Has anyone checked how she got that fellowship spot? She's at his table every morning. That's not a coincidence. I heard her application had irregularities. Ngozi heard all of it and carried it without letting it reach her face. The second move landed in her inbox on a Tuesday morning, a formal notice from the fellowship's oversight board. Her placement file flagged for review, housing stipend suspended. 2 of her 3 recommendation letters listed as requiring re-verification. She read it twice, set her laptop down, read it a third time. Then she found Chitty and handed him her phone without a word. His face moved through several things before settling on something controlled. "This isn't an administrative accident. I know. We should go straight to the dean's office." "No," she took the phone back. "I study strategy, Chitty. Exactly this. How institutions apply quiet pressure and how people push back without losing their footing. This is the entire reason I came here." "Let me handle it." He sighed the sigh of a man who knew he wasn't going to win. "Fine, 1 text away, any hour." "I know," she said and meant it. She spent the next 2 weeks navigating the review board with a precision that surprised no one who actually knew her. She arrived before offices opened. She brought documents nobody had asked for yet because she'd already worked out what they'd ask for next. She cleared the first flag herself, then the second. The third wouldn't move, not through slowness, but deliberate pressure, applied by a hand that knew exactly which lever to press without leaving a fingerprint. Sitting in the campus cafe mapping what remained, she understood with total clarity that this door had been closed against her personally, in a way that would never be provable. There was going to have to be another way, and she was still working out what that way was when she heard the voices in the East Garden. She'd taken the long way back from her evening seminar because she liked the narrow garden along the east wall, small white flowers there, with a smell that settled something in her chest. Not quite like home, but standing in the same doorway as home. She heard the voices before she reached the gate, low, tight, the particular frequency of a conversation under real pressure. She slowed. Through a gap in the hedge she could see the small courtyard beyond, T-Min, and an older man she'd never seen, expensively dressed. With the stillness of someone who never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. The Korean moved too fast for her to follow completely, but she caught the shape of it, something owed, something expected. The tone of a man reminding someone of an obligation he'd never once been offered the option of forgetting. Taemin's answers came back quiet, each word set down carefully, like stones laid across a river, not agreeing, not quite refusing either. The sound of someone holding a line through pure, sustained effort. The older man left, footsteps fading down the far path. Silence settled over the courtyard, and through the hedge she could see Taemin's profile, and for the first time since the library table, he looked like the thing he was carrying was actually heavy. Like the audience had left, and he'd finally stopped bothering to hold it up. She hadn't planned to step around the hedge. She did it before she'd finished deciding to. He turned sharply, saw her, and the composure came back instantly, not slowly. He was very practiced, but she'd seen the second before it arrived, and they both knew she had. "I take this path every evening," she said. "I wasn't following you." He looked at her, calculating something that wasn't danger, whether she was frightened, whether she'd perform being frightened. Whether this was going to become something she'd carry around and tell people about later. She just looked back, hands loose at her sides. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough to know it wasn't a kind conversation," she said, "not enough to repeat it." A long silence. "You should go home," he said finally, not unkindly, just tired, in a register she'd never heard from him before. She nodded, turned to leave, then stopped. "You sounded," she said, still facing away, "like somebody who hasn't given up yet." A small pause behind her. "That's different from somebody who's already lost." She walked back through the garden, past the white flowers and the smell that was almost like home. She heard nothing behind her, but she knew he was still standing there. He stood in that courtyard a long time after her footsteps faded. His father's voice was still sitting in his ears, the register his father used when he wasn't asking. He knew every beat of it. What he hadn't expected was a voice from behind a hedge, with no performance in it at all, telling him he sounded like somebody who hadn't given up. He turned it over the whole walk home. He did not sleep well. Sira moved the way water moves through stone, not by force, by patience, returning again and again to the place already a little worn, until the structure finally gave. The final move came on a Thursday, a formal complaint filed with the Fellowship Board, built from manufactured inconsistencies. Assembled carefully by someone with real access and real time, and a very detailed understanding of how institutions process paper. Not designed to intimidate, designed to end her placement entirely. Ngozi found out Friday morning. She sat with it overnight. On Saturday, she requested a formal hearing. Chidi sat in the back with his arms crossed, jaw set, silent through the entire thing. Ngozi stood at the front and laid out everything, every document, every timeline, every quiet act of interference she'd cataloged for weeks, her fellowship record immaculate underneath all of it. She built the case layer by layer, the way she'd crossed an ocean specifically to learn to build them, until the structure was simply, visibly sound. The board chair looked down at his papers. A few committee members exchanged glances, but the room stayed suspended, waiting to see which way things would fall before picking a side. "Your presentation is noted," the chair said finally. However, she isn't mistaken. A voice cut in from the side of the room, low, unhurried, familiar. Every head turned. Taemin hadn't planned to speak. He'd come because his family's standing made his presence expected, meaning to sit through it composed and unreadable. Then the chair had started reading from that complaint, and he'd recognized its shape before the second sentence. He knew exactly whose hand had built it. He'd looked at Ngozi. Completely still, not shocked, ready, standing up and laying out a case rather than defending her own life, in a room full of people who decided, collectively, to study the floor. Something moved in his chest, quiet and simple, gathering since a library table and a hedge-lined courtyard. He stood. He had never once in his life made a speech. He stated facts, the board's own published review threshold, the precise reason this complaint didn't clear it. The word manufactured, said once, looking directly at the chair, who suddenly found the far wall extremely interesting. The room which had been deciding stopped deciding. It had decided. The complaint should be dismissed, he said. Today, nobody spoke. He didn't sit down. Today, he said again. The hearing moved to its next item. The complaint was dismissed that same afternoon. Afterward, the corridor hummed with the electricity of a student body that would still be talking about this in a month. Ngozi found the quiet end of the hall and stood with her back against the wall, breathing. Her hands were steady, her chest was not. Chidi appeared, put a hand on her shoulder for exactly 1 second, said nothing, which was precisely correct, and stepped back, footsteps. She turned. Min stopped a few feet away. You had it, he said. Everything you laid out, you had all of it. Yes, you would have one without me, probably. A pause. Something moved across his face that she was still learning how to read. You were about to shut him down anyway, she said. You know that. Yes. The corridor emptied a little more. Thank you, she said simply. He nodded once. She almost let him walk away. Min, he stopped. Why? He was quiet a moment, and then his face did the thing, the open thing, the one she'd first seen across a table in the middle of an argument about interaction terms. When he'd forgotten for 11 seconds to be composed. Because you were right, he said, and that should be enough on its own. He held her eyes 1 more second, then walked away down the corridor. Ngozi stayed against the wall and listened to his footsteps fade, and from somewhere behind her, Chidi said, very quietly, very carefully, Ngozi. Don't, I didn't say anything. I swear to God. Okay, he said. Okay, but she could hear the smile in it. Sira found him the next day, gracefully unhurried, as though she'd simply been walking in this direction all morning. You made me look foolish, she said. In front of the entire board, I made the board correct a manufactured complaint. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. A silence, her eyes holding his without moving. Our families, she said finally, everything expected of us. You know what this looks like. I've always known what it looks like. Then behave like it. That girl isn't part of your world. She'll finish her fellowship and go home. Don't, he said quietly. Tell me what my story is. Something small and controlled crossed her face and was gone. She left, graceful as always, but the set of her shoulders was different, and he noticed, because he noticed everything now. 3 weeks later, the fellowship cohort hosted its annual Founders Night, where each student pitched a short venture to a room of alumni and sponsors. Chidi had, in an act of cheerful sabotage, submitted her for the closing spotlight without asking. I never agreed to this. You didn't disagree either. I chose to interpret silence as enthusiasm. That is not what silence means, Chidi. You have a real idea and a real story, and you should tell it in front of people who can actually fund it. It'll be fine, she stood backstage through the earlier presentations, trying not to think about having to walk out and talk about something that actually mattered to her, a microlending platform for immigrant small business owners. Modeled on the lending circles her mother's church had run in Houston her whole childhood. You're fine, Chidi said. You've been telling this story your whole life. You just haven't said it to strangers yet. She thought about her mother at the airport, both hands on her face, memorizing it. About being 9,000 miles from everything she'd known and still, somehow, entirely herself. She walked out. The room was full and warm and looking at her. She spoke without notes, about lending circles run by women who never once called what they were doing finance, about her mother counting church envelopes at the kitchen table. About how the biggest ideas in her life had never worn a suit. Her voice caught once on her mother's name, and she let it catch and kept going anyway. Min was near the back, there because Sira had mentioned attending, meaning to stay the minimum length that registered as attendance. He heard the catch in her voice and stopped moving. What landed on him wasn't the financial model. It was a woman letting a room full of strangers see exactly how much something mattered to her, without apologizing for the size of the feeling. The room had gone still, so had he. Beside him, Sira leaned in and said something quiet, precisely aimed to redirect his attention. He didn't hear a word of it. She finished. The room held its silence for 3 full seconds, and then broke into applause loud enough to embarrass her. She looked up and found his eyes across the room immediately, in the first second of looking, like she'd already known exactly where to find them. He hadn't moved. He hadn't done anything to draw her attention, and his face was doing something he couldn't control, and he knew it, and he couldn't stop it. She looked away first. He watched color climb into her cheeks from across a crowded room and understood, with complete and deeply inconvenient certainty, that he was finished. She was on the terrace steps afterward, knees pulled up, soul humming below the way it always did. He sat down beside her. She didn't look surprised. She waited. What was the platform named after? He asked. My mother's church group. Isusu, a rotating fund, everybody contributing, everybody eventually receiving. No bank, no interest. Just trust held in common. She paused. Closest translation is we all carry each other in turn. He sat with that. I've lived in this city my whole life, and I don't think I've ever once felt like anyone was carrying me in turn. She turned and really looked at him. The way she did when deciding what something meant. That's very lonely, she said, not with pity, just a fact set down between them. Yes, the city moved beneath them, wind carrying the strange washed blue of Seoul's night sky. T-Min. I'm glad you stayed for it. He didn't answer, but he stayed on those steps a long time after that. So did she. 3 days after Founders Night, he wasn't there. Not the library, not the cafe, not crossing the courtyard. His seat across from her stayed empty, and the table felt different in a way she hadn't known a table could feel, and that fact alone told her things she wasn't ready to look at directly. Chidi found her on the third afternoon and sat down without his usual energy, which told her something before he even spoke. His family called him home. There's a dinner with the Min family, the kind that isn't announced as an announcement, but everyone knows exactly what it is. She set her pen down. It's fine. It's his world. I always knew what it was. You're allowed to not be fine. I know, she said quietly. I'm not. He said nothing else. He just stayed at the table, which was exactly what she needed. On the fourth day, she was at her corner table. Same seat, same posture of a woman who had decided something and intended to hold to it. The library door opened. She finished her sentence before she looked up. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He sat down across from her. I didn't go, he said. The dinner. I sat with my father for 4 hours first. He told me everything, what my name requires, why, since when. I let him finish. Then I told him I wouldn't be there. That must have cost you. Yes. He looked at her, nothing managed, nothing calculated about how much to let show. I heard you talk about your mother's lending circle, and I finally understood something I'd been refusing to understand on purpose. My whole life, somebody else decided what my life looks like, my father, my name, the arrangement, a breath. You told me in that garden I sounded like somebody who hadn't given up. I didn't want to make you wrong. I'm going to the vending machine, she said, standing. He blinked. What? The one by the east entrance. It actually works. Do you want something? He looked for 1 full second, completely lost. Yes. Then come, she said, and walked. He got up and followed her, and Chidi, 3 tables away pretending to read the same page for 40 minutes, watched them go and said very quietly to absolutely nobody. Finally, there was a night market 4 streets behind campus that nobody from Hanel bothered with. Too loud, too ordinary, too much like a real city instead of a performance of one. Ngozi loved it, had gone back every Friday since her 2nd week, and never told anyone because it was hers. She told T-Min about it. He came with her one Friday, and nobody there knew his family name, and nobody rearranged anything for him. He stood at a stall holding out a small paper tray. Try it, what is it? Just try it. She tried it and was visibly annoyed that it was good. You look irritated, he said. Because I was wrong, he almost smiled. You can't always be right. Watch me. He did, actually, watched her work through 4 more stalls with commentary so dry and precise that at some point he started genuinely laughing. Not the controlled public version, but real laughter, startled out of him. She looked at him with an expression that was very carefully neutral, and absolutely was not. The library mornings became the shape everything else arranged itself around. He taught her words that didn't survive translation, nunchai, reading a room without needing to be told anything, jiang. The bond between 2 people who have shared enough honesty that they've quietly become part of how the other experiences the world. Is there a moment it forms? She asked. No, you never notice it happening. You only notice that it already has. She taught him words back. NNE, mother, warmer and older than the English word. I tomorrow, carrying hope inside it instead of just time. He was quiet a moment. That's a far more demanding definition than ours, he said. I think I prefer it. The end of the semester came the way endings always do, all at once, and then not fast enough. Exams finished. Suitcases appeared in dorm corridors. Ngozi sat at her corner table on the last morning, working very hard at not being sentimental about a piece of furniture and failing at it completely. She heard the door and knew without looking. He sat down across from her and didn't pretend to have another reason. They sat in their familiar silence, morning light through the tall windows, Seoul moving below and beyond all of it. When do you fly out? He asked. Tomorrow early, he nodded, and you'll be back in the spring. not a question, she said. Yes, same table, he said quietly. She looked up. He was watching her with the open face she'd watched surface slowly across an entire semester, a little more fully every time, a little less surprised at itself. He set something on the table between them, small, simply wrapped. Open it. Inside was a small leather notebook. On the first page, his handwriting, careful and precise, Korean on one side, English facing it, not declarations, just small true things he'd noticed and never once said aloud. The first time he'd heard her argue with a case study and realized she only ever argued with things she respected. The East Garden with one line underneath it. I went home that night and thought about it until it was light. The hearing, and beneath it, I stood up before I decided to. I think I'd actually decided weeks before that. She read 4 pages and closed it because she didn't trust herself with a 5th. You don't have to say anything, he said. I just wanted you to have something true. She looked at him, this person who had taken her seriously from the very first correction about a spreadsheet, who had stood up in a room full of people studying the floor and said she isn't wrong without rehearsing it once, who had answered why every single time she asked and never once told her to stop asking. I'm going to tell you something, she said. When I got on that plane in Houston, I had exactly one plan: finish the fellowship, go home. Do the work I crossed an ocean to learn how to do. She paused. I did not plan for any of this. I'm not somebody who changes her plans easily. I want you to know that. I know that. But I think, she said slowly, you might be worth adjusting for. Not changing, he said. No, adjusting. I know the difference. Good. She stood, packed her things efficiently, unhurried, and tucked the notebook into her bag with the specific care she gave things she had no intention of losing. She stopped beside his chair on her way out. Don't let them take anything from you while I'm gone, the things you've chosen for yourself. Hold on to those. I will. She looked at him once more, the way you finish a sentence properly, and walked out down the stairs and into a soul that was golden and enormous and completely indifferent, the way cities always are when something private is happening inside them. He sat at the corner table a long time in the quiet she'd left behind, looking at the empty space where her books had been. He thought about 22 years, spent living inside a world finished and furnished before anyone thought to consult him, the name, the weight. The rooms that rearranged themselves before he'd even entered them. He thought about a woman who'd said no to him on her 9th day in the country and had never once since given him anything she didn't actually mean. Slowly, he smiled, the real one. It reached his eyes and stayed there. She came back in the spring. He was already at the table. She crossed the 4th floor with the same unhurried posture of a woman who never needed a room's permission to stand in it, stopped at the corner table, and looked at him sitting in her seat. You're in my chair, he moved without a word. She sat, settled her bag, then set the small leather notebook on the table between them. I added pages, she said simply, opening her textbook. While I was home, he picked it up, opened it to where her handwriting began, English on one side, Igbo facing it. He read the first entry, then the second, then the third, and stopped. The third was dated 2 weeks into the summer. It said in English and then again beneath it in Igbo, I think Jiang might be the right word after all. I never noticed it happening. I only noticed that it already had. He closed the notebook carefully. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She was already reading, pen moving, the same corner table, the same tall windows, the same city blazing away outside like it had never once paused for either of them. He opened his own book. They began. Outside, the spring light came down across Seoul, clear and gold, the particular quality of a morning that is also a beginning. And inside, at a corner table on the 4th floor of the Hanel Library, a girl from Houston and a man who'd spent 22 years being a name before he was ever allowed to be a person, sat across from each other in the best kind of silence, the kind that has nothing left to prove. Now that's a love story worth remembering, don't you think? Tell us in the comments what part hit you hardest, and whether you'd want a part 2 following Ngozi and Taemin into their 2nd year. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because we drop stories exactly like this one every single week, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the moment a new one goes live. We'll see you in the next one.